The sound of gunfire echoed through the dusty streets of Brownsville, Texas. As Matilda Kelly ducked behind a water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs and her trembling hands clutching a small leather satchel containing everything she owned in this world. She hadn't expected her new life in the West to begin with bullets flying over her head. But then again, nothing in her life had gone according to plan since that terrible night in Boston 3 years ago. The year was 1875, and Brownsville sat on the very edge of civilization, a border town caught between American ambitions and Mexican heritage, a place where fortunes could be made and lives could be lost in the blink of an eye. Matilda had chosen it specifically for its remoteness, hoping that her past couldn't follow her this far. "Stay down, miss." A deep voice commanded as a tall figure dove beside her, the brim of his worn Stetson obscuring his face. His hand gripped a Colt revolver with the ease of someone far too accustomed to its weight. Matilda pressed herself flatter against the wooden trough as another volley of shots splintered the boards above them. "I didn't ask for your help," she managed to say between gasping breaths. "Didn't offer it for asking," the stranger replied, rising slightly to return fire. 3 precise shots, and the street fell silent save for the sound of retreating hoofbeats. He turned to her then, and Matilda found herself looking into the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face framed by sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the collar of his duster. "Name's Fletcher Calloway," he said, holstering his weapon and offering her a hand up. "And you picked one hell of a day to arrive in Brownsville, madam." Matilda ignored his outstretched hand and stood on her own, brushing dust from her travel-worn skirts. "I wasn't aware I needed to schedule my arrival around the local gunfights, Mr. Calloway." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It's not usually this exciting. Those were the Harker boys. They've been causing trouble since the sheriff took ill." He studied her with a frankness that made her uncomfortable. "You look like you could use a meal and a place to stay. The Crossroads Inn is just down the street, assuming you've got funds." "I can manage my affairs, thank you," Matilda said stiffly, gripping her satchel tighter. The last thing she needed was some local cowboy taking an interest in her. Interest led to questions, and questions led to discovery. "Suit yourself," Fletcher said, tipping his hat. "But a word of advice, Brownsville ain't Boston or New York. Out here, pride can get you killed faster than a rattlesnake bite." Matilda froze. "How did you your boots?" he said simply. "Eastern made, fine quality. Stand out like a sore thumb in these parts." With that, he turned and walked toward the saloon, spurs jingling with each step. Matilda watched him go, unsettled by his perception. She'd have to be more careful. Exhausted from her journey and the unexpected excitement, she made her way to the Crossroads Inn, a 2-story wooden building that had seen better days but at least appeared clean. The innkeeper, a plump woman with kind eyes named Mrs. Abernathy, took one look at Matilda's travel-worn appearance and clucked her tongue sympathetically. "You poor dear. Come in, come in. We've got a nice room available, and I've just made fresh stew." For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, Matilda felt her guard lower slightly. "That's very kind, thank you." "Not kind, just decent," Mrs. Abernathy replied. "Something tells me you've seen your share of indecent folk." Matilda said nothing to this, but her silence seemed answer enough for the older woman, who showed her to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. "Rest up," Mrs. Abernathy said. "Tomorrow's soon enough to face whatever brought you to our little corner of nowhere." Alone at last, Matilda sank onto the bed and finally allowed the tears she'd been holding back to fall. She hadn't cried since leaving Boston, not through the long train journey west, nor during the bumpy stagecoach ride to this dusty border town. But now, in the privacy of this simple room, the weight of everything she'd lost crashed down on her. She cried for her parents, gone 3 years now in the fire that had taken their home and nearly her life as well. She cried for the scars that marred her back and right arm, hidden beneath her clothing, but a constant reminder of that night. And she cried for the life she'd once had respectable, comfortable, with a future that had seemed so certain. When her tears finally subsided, Matilda washed her face in the basin of water Mrs. Abernathy had provided and stood before the small mirror on the wall. At 22, she should have been in the prime of her youth, but her green eyes held shadows too deep for someone so young. Her chestnut hair, once her pride, had been cut shorter than was fashionable, making her look severe rather than pretty. "This is your life now," she told her reflection firmly. "Make something of it." The next morning, Matilda dressed in her one good outfit, a simple but well-made blue dress that had once belonged to her mother, and went downstairs. She needed to find work quickly. Her funds wouldn't last more than a week or two at most. Mrs. Abernathy was serving breakfast to a few early risers, including, to Matilda's dismay, Fletcher Calloway. He sat alone at a corner table, a cup of coffee and a plate of eggs before him. He looked up as she entered, and Matilda pretended not to notice his gaze. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Abernathy greeted her. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," Matilda lied. In truth, she'd barely slept at all, plagued by the nightmares that still haunted her after all this time, flames and screams and choking smoke. "I was wondering," Matilda continued, keeping her voice low, "if you know of anyone in town who might be hiring. I have some experience as a seamstress, and I can read and write well enough to keep books." Mrs. Abernathy looked thoughtful. "Well now, Mrs. Wilson at the general store was saying just yesterday she could use some help. Her eyesight's not what it was, and she has trouble with the ledgers these days. You might try there." "Thank you, I will," Matilda said, grateful for the lead. After a quick breakfast of biscuits and coffee, she set out for the general store, determined to secure employment before the day was through. Wilson's General Store occupied a prime location on Brownsville's Main Street. It was larger than Matilda had expected, with a wide porch out front where a few old men sat in rocking chairs, watching the town wake up. A bell tinkled cheerfully as she pushed open the door. The interior was crowded with goods of every description, foodstuffs and dry goods, tools and household items, even a small selection of books and paper goods. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with white hair pulled into a neat bun, peering through spectacles at a ledger. "Good morning," Matilda said. "Are you Mrs. Wilson?" The woman looked up, squinting slightly. "I am, and you're new in town, the girl who arrived on yesterday's stage just in time for the Harker boys' latest mischief." News traveled fast in small towns, it seemed. "Yes, madam." "My name is Matilda Kelly. Mrs. Abernathy at the inn mentioned you might be looking for help with your books." Mrs. Wilson studied her for a moment. "Can you cipher, read and write a proper hand?" "Yes, madam. I was educated at Miss Pemberley's Academy for Young Ladies in Boston." "I'm also skilled with a needle." "Boston, eh?" Mrs. Wilson looked impressed. "What brings a Boston girl all the way to the border?" Matilda had prepared for this question. "My parents passed away. There was nothing left for me there." It wasn't a lie, not exactly, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Still, it seemed to satisfy Mrs. Wilson, who nodded sympathetically. "Well, I could use the help, that's certain. My eyes aren't what they were, and my arthritis makes writing painful some days." She pushed the ledger toward Matilda. "Show me what you can do with this. Last week's entries need balancing." For the next hour, Matilda worked through the ledger, finding several small errors that, when corrected, balanced the books perfectly. Mrs. Wilson watched over her shoulder, nodding in approval. "You'll do," she said finally. 6 days a week, Sundays off, 8 to 6 with an hour for lunch, $2 a week plus room and board if you need it. I've got a room upstairs I don't use." The wage was modest, but the offer of lodging would save Matilda precious funds. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson, I accept. Good, you can start today." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "And call me Edith. Mrs. Wilson makes me feel like my mother-in-law, God rest her soul." By midday, Matilda had reorganized the store's account books and begun taking inventory of the dry goods section. The work was straightforward and satisfying, requiring just enough concentration to keep her mind from wandering to darker places. The bell above the door jingled frequently as customers came and went. Matilda kept her head down, focusing on her work until a familiar voice made her look up. "Afternoon, Mrs. Wilson. Got that order of fence wire I asked about?" Fletcher Calloway stood at the counter, hat in hand. In the daylight, Matilda could see him more clearly, tall and lean, with the wiry strength of a man who worked with his hands. His clothes were worn but clean, and despite herself, Matilda noted the way his shirt stretched across broad shoulders. "Mr. Calloway," Edith greeted him warmly. "Yes, indeed, came in on yesterday's freight wagon, and look here, I've hired myself some help. This is Miss Kelly, just arrived from Boston." Fletcher turned, seeming unsurprised to see her there. "We've met," he said, nodding politely. "Miss Kelly." "Mr. Calloway," Matilda acknowledged stiffly. "Fletcher has one of the best cattle operations in the county," Edith informed Matilda. "Started with almost nothing 5 years ago. Now he's got himself a fine spread about 10 miles north of town. The Circle C." "Mrs. Wilson exaggerates," Fletcher said, though he looked pleased at the praise. "It's a modest operation, but it keeps me busy." "Too busy to find yourself a wife, apparently," Edith teased, and Matilda wanted to sink through the floorboards at the older woman's blatant matchmaking. Fletcher, however, merely chuckled. "When I find a woman willing to put up with a stubborn cowboy who works from sunup to sundown, I'll let you know." His eyes met Matilda's briefly, and she quickly looked away, busying herself with the inventory list again. "Your fence wire's in the back," Edith told him. "Miss Kelly can help you load it while I mind the counter." Matilda wanted to protest, but Edith was already moving toward the front of the store to assist another customer who had just entered. With a sigh, she set down her pencil and led Fletcher to the storeroom. "You found work quickly," he observed as they navigated the cramped space. "I need to eat," Matilda replied shortly. "The wire should be over here." They found the bundles of wire stacked against the wall. Fletcher lifted one easily, his muscles flexing beneath his shirt. "I'll take these out to my wagon. There should be 4 bundles total." Matilda nodded, keeping her distance as he carried the first bundle outside. When he returned for the second, he paused, looking at her with those unsettlingly perceptive blue eyes. "You know," he said conversationally, "folks around here generally mind their own business. Whatever you're running from, no one in Brownsville is likely to care much." Matilda stiffened. "I'm not running from anything." Fletcher's expression remained neutral. "If you say so." He hefted the second bundle of wire. "But if you ever need help, the offer stands. Not everyone with secrets is bad, Miss Kelly. Some just have scars they'd rather keep hidden." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Matilda to wonder just how transparent her carefully constructed facade really was. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Matilda worked diligently at the general store, gradually earning Edith's trust and respect. She moved into the room above the store, a small but comfortable space that she made her own with simple touches, a vase of wildflowers on the dresser, a quilt she'd mended for her bed. She kept largely to herself, politely declining invitations to socials or church gatherings. The less people knew about her, the better. Still, in a town the size of Brownsville, it was impossible to remain completely anonymous. People nodded to her on the street, and regulars at the store greeted her by name. Fletcher Calloway came to town every week or so for supplies. He was unfailingly polite, never pushing for more than casual conversation, but Matilda caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. It unsettled her how easily he seemed to see through the barriers she'd so carefully constructed. One sweltering afternoon in late June, a dust-covered rider came thundering into town, pulling up sharply in front of the doctor's office. Matilda, who had been sweeping the store's porch, paused to watch as several men emerged from the saloon. "What's the trouble, Mike?" called one of them. "Snake bite out at the Circle C," the rider shouted. "One of the hands got bit checking fence lines. Fletcher sent me for the doc and antivenom." Matilda felt a chill despite the heat. Without thinking, she hurried across the street to where the rider was dismounting. "How bad is it?" she asked. The man looked at her in surprise. "Bad enough. Got Tom on the ankle. Fletcher's doing what he can, but—" Dr. Henderson, a graying man with spectacles, emerged from his office, medical bag in hand. "I'll need a fresh horse," he said. "Mine's not up for a hard ride." "Take mine," Mike offered. I'll follow when I can. I'm coming too, Matilda heard herself say. Both men turned to her in surprise. Miss Kelly, this isn't, the doctor began. I have experience with snake bites, she interrupted. My father was a doctor in Boston. I assisted him often. This, at least, was true. What she didn't say was that her knowledge of treating venomous bites came from the months she'd spent in Panama with her father while he studied tropical medicine knowledge that had done him no good when their house caught fire years later. Dr. Henderson hesitated, then nodded curtly. Very well. But we need to move quickly. Within minutes, Matilda found herself on a borrowed horse, galloping alongside the doctor toward the Circle C ranch. The landscape blurred around them, scrubby mesquite and prickly pear cactus giving way to slightly greener pastures as they followed the course of a seasonal creek. The Circle C came into view after nearly an hour of hard riding, a modest but well-maintained ranch house with several outbuildings and corrals. As they approached, Fletcher emerged from the bunkhouse, his face grim with worry. He stopped short at the sight of Matilda. Miss Kelly. She says she has experience with snake bites, Dr. Henderson explained as he dismounted. Where's the patient? In here, Fletcher said, leading them into the bunkhouse where a young cowhand lay on a narrow bed, his face ashen and slick with sweat. His right leg was propped up on a folded blanket, the ankle swollen to nearly twice its normal size. 2 angry puncture marks were visible just above the boot line. Rattler got me, the man said through gritted teeth. Wasn't even a big one. Doesn't need to be, doctor. Henderson replied, opening his bag. How long ago? About 2 hours, Fletcher answered. I made a tourniquet, tried to keep him calm. Matilda moved to the injured man's side, automatically checking his pulse. Has he vomited, experienced blurred vision? Both, Fletcher confirmed, watching her closely. You really do know about snake bites. My father treated many cases in Panama, Matilda said, focused on the patient. What's your name? She asked the cowhand. Tom Matthews, madam, he managed. Well, Tom, we're going to take care of you. She looked at Dr. Henderson. Did you bring antivenom? The doctor nodded, removing a small bottle from his bag. Latest formula from Philadelphia, but I've only used it once before. I've assisted with multiple treatments, Matilda said confidently. If you'll allow me. To her surprise, doctor. Henderson handed her the bottle. Show me. For the next hour, Matilda worked alongside the doctor, administering the antivenom and treating Tom's symptoms as they arose. Fletcher assisted silently, fetching water and clean cloths when needed, his eyes rarely leaving Matilda's face. By nightfall, Tom's condition had stabilized. The swelling had begun to subside and his fever had broken. Dr. Henderson sat back, visibly impressed. You have a remarkable knowledge of medicine, Miss Kelly, he said. Your father taught you well. Matilda nodded, suddenly self-conscious under the scrutiny of both men. He believed women should be educated in practical matters, not just needlepoint and piano. A progressive thinker, Fletcher commented. You must miss him. The simple observation, spoken quietly, threatened to crack the composure Matilda had maintained throughout the medical emergency. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Every day. Dr. Henderson, sensing the shift in mood, stood and stretched his back. I believe our patient will recover, though he'll need rest for several days. I should return to town before it gets any later. It's already full dark, Fletcher objected. The trail can be treacherous at night. I insist you both stay until morning. We have plenty of room. The doctor looked relieved at the suggestion. That would be most welcome. These old bones aren't meant for midnight rides anymore. Matilda, however, felt panic rising at the thought of spending the night in Fletcher Calloway's home. It was one thing to maintain her guard during brief encounters in town, quite another to be under his perceptive gaze for hours on end. I couldn't impose, she began. It's no imposition, Fletcher said firmly, and it would be irresponsible of me to let you ride back alone in the dark. The main house has a guest room you can use, Miss Kelly. I promise you'll be comfortable. Trapped by propriety and practicality, Matilda reluctantly agreed. After ensuring Tom was sleeping comfortably under the watchful eye of another ranch hand, she followed Fletcher and the doctor to the main house. The ranch house was modest but well built, with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. Inside, it was surprisingly comfortable, clean, and orderly, with simple but quality furnishings. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, though it was unlit in the summer heat. "Make yourselves at home," Fletcher said. "I'll see about some supper. My housekeeper, Mrs. Diaz, left food before heading to her daughter's for the night." While Dr. Henderson settled into a comfortable chair with a sigh, Matilda found herself drawn to the bookshelves that lined one wall. They were filled with an eclectic mix of volumes, practical books on ranching and veterinary medicine, histories of the West, and, to her surprise, several shelves of literature. Dickens sat alongside Hawthorne, Shakespeare next to Whitman. "Find anything interesting?" Fletcher asked, returning with a tray of cold meats, bread, and cheese. "I wouldn't have taken you for a reader of poetry," Matilda said, indicating a well-worn copy of Leaves of Grass. Fletcher smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "There's more to most people than meets the eye, Miss Kelly, including cowboys." The simple meal was better than Matilda had expected, and despite her reservations, she found herself relaxing as they ate. Dr. Henderson regaled them with tales of his early days as a frontier doctor, and even Fletcher shared a few amusing stories about his first disastrous attempts at ranching. "I came west with grand ideas and precious little practical knowledge," he admitted. "First winter, I nearly lost everything. Would have if not for the Mexicans and Tejanos who took pity on this foolish gringo." "What made you come west?" Matilda asked, curious despite herself. Something flickered in Fletcher's eyes, a shadow of old pain quickly masked. "The war," he said simply. "After Gettysburg, I couldn't go back to Pennsylvania. Too many ghosts." The Civil War had ended a decade ago, but Matilda knew its wounds remained fresh for many. "You fought for the Union then?" Fletcher nodded. 5th Pennsylvania Cavalry. "I was 19 when I enlisted, 22 when it ended, felt a lifetime older." He looked at her thoughtfully. "But we all have our wars, don't we, Miss Kelly? Some are just fought on different battlefields." Before Matilda could formulate a response, Dr. Henderson yawned widely. "Forgive me," he said. "It seems the day has caught up with me." "Of course," Fletcher said, standing. "Let me show you both to your rooms." The guest room was simple but comfortable, with a brass bed covered in a colorful quilt and a small dresser topped with a porcelain wash basin. A window overlooked the corrals and the open range beyond, silvered now in the moonlight. "There's water in the pitcher," Fletcher told her. "Bathrooms down the hall if you need it. I'm afraid I don't have any women's night clothes, but there's a clean shirt in the dresser you can use if you like." "This is fine, thank you," Matilda said, still maintaining a careful distance. Fletcher lingered in the doorway, watching her with those penetrating blue eyes. "You were impressive today," he said finally. "Tom might have lost that leg without your help." "Doctor." "Henderson would have managed," Matilda demurred. "Maybe, but your confidence made a difference." He hesitated. "Whatever you're hiding from, Miss Kelly, it doesn't diminish who you are now." The words struck too close to home, and Matilda felt her carefully constructed walls tremble. "You don't know anything about me," she said, more sharply than she'd intended. "I know enough," Fletcher replied quietly. "I know pain when I see it, and strength." He straightened, stepping back into the hallway. "Good night, Miss Kelly, sleep well." After he left, Matilda sat on the edge of the bed, her composure finally crumbling. How did this man she barely knew see so clearly what she tried so hard to hide, and why did his perceptiveness frighten her so much? She moved to the window, looking out at the vast Texas landscape bathed in moonlight, so different from Boston with its crowded streets and sooty air. Out here, the land stretched endlessly, promising freedom and perhaps, someday, peace. After washing up and changing into the borrowed shirt, which smelled faintly of soap and something uniquely Fletcher, Matilda slipped into bed. Despite her tumultuous thoughts, the physical exhaustion of the day soon pulled her toward sleep. For the first time in years, she didn't dream of fire. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the distant sounds of ranch life stirring. Matilda dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Fletcher frying bacon at the stove. He'd already made coffee, its rich aroma filling the room. "Good morning," he greeted her, looking unfairly alert and handsome in the early light. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," Matilda replied, surprised to realize it was true. "Can I help with breakfast?" Fletcher nodded toward a bowl of eggs. "You could scramble those if you don't mind." "Doc's checking on Tom, but he'll be hungry when he gets back." They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, Fletcher tending the bacon while Matilda beat the eggs and poured them into a second skillet. It felt oddly domestic, and Matilda found herself imagining, just for a moment, what it might be like to live such a life: simple, honest work with the vast sky above and a good man beside her. The thought startled her so much she nearly dropped the spatula. "Everything all right?" Fletcher asked, glancing at her. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just thinking." Dr. Henderson joined them shortly, reporting that Tom was doing well and would make a full recovery. They ate breakfast together, making plans for the return to Brownsville. "I'll escort you both," Fletcher said. "I need to come to town anyway for more supplies." By mid-morning they were on their way, riding at a more leisurely pace than the previous day's desperate gallop. Dr. Henderson rode ahead, leaving Matilda and Fletcher to follow side by side. "Your ranch is impressive," Matilda said after a while, breaking the silence between them. "You've built something substantial here." Fletcher looked pleased at the compliment. "It's been hard work, but worth it. This land gets under your skin after a while, becomes part of you." "I can see why," Matilda admitted, looking around at the rugged beauty of the landscape. "It's so vast, makes a person's troubles seem smaller somehow." "That's part of why I stayed," Fletcher said. "After the war I needed space to breathe, room to outrun my demons." He glanced at her. "Sometimes it works." The simple admission of vulnerability touched Matilda unexpectedly. "And the other times," Fletcher's smile held a hint of sadness. "The other times, I remember what my grandfather used to say: the only way past is through." They rode in silence for a while after that, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Brownsville, Matilda felt a curious reluctance. The day at the Circle C had been a strange interlude in her carefully controlled existence, dangerous in its way, but also oddly freeing. Back in town, Fletcher saw them safely to the doctor's office before escorting Matilda to the general store. Edith was clearly relieved to see her, having heard about the emergency at the Circle C. "I was worried sick when I heard you'd gone rushing off," she scolded gently. "Though Dr. Henderson's wife tells me you were quite the heroine." Matilda flushed. "I only did what anyone with my knowledge would have done." "Which is more than most could claim," Fletcher pointed out. "You saved a man's leg yesterday, possibly his life. That's not nothing, Miss Kelly." Before Matilda could respond, the store door opened and three rough-looking men sauntered in. The atmosphere changed instantly, tension crackling in the air. Fletcher's posture shifted subtly, one hand moving closer to his holstered revolver. "Afternoon, Mrs. Wilson," the leader of the trio drawled, ignoring Fletcher and Matilda completely. "Got ourselves a list of supplies. Be obliged if you'd fill it quick like." Edith's face had gone pale, but she took the crumpled paper he thrust at her with steady hands. "Of course, Mr. Harker. It'll take a few minutes to gather everything." Matilda recognized the name with a jolt: the Harker boys, the same men who had been shooting up the town the day she arrived. The leader caught her looking and grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Well now, what have we here?" "Don't believe I've had the pleasure, Miss. Miss Kelly is my assistant," Edith said quickly. "She'll help me with your order." "That's so." Harker's gaze raked over Matilda in a way that made her skin crawl. "Pretty little thing for a shop girl." Fletcher stepped forward, positioning himself between Matilda and the Harker brothers. "Your supplies, gentlemen, that's all you're here for." The oldest Harker brother, Matilda guessed him to be in his 30s, narrowed his eyes at Fletcher. "Calloway. Still poking your nose where it don't belong, I see. Still breaking the law wherever you go, I see," Fletcher countered evenly. "Sheriff Jackson's back on his feet, thought you should know." This news seemed to dampen the brothers' arrogance slightly. The leader spat on the floor, ignoring Edith's gasp of outrage. "Get our supplies, woman. We ain't got all day." Matilda and Edith quickly gathered the items on the list: ammunition, tobacco, whiskey, and basic foodstuffs. Fletcher remained by the counter, his presence a silent barrier between the women and the Harker brothers. Once the supplies were paid for and the brothers had left, Edith sank into a chair, trembling slightly. "Those men are poison," she said. "Been terrorizing the county since they moved in last year. Sheriff ran them off once, but they came back bolder than ever when he took ill with fever last month. They're squatting on Mendoza land over by Devil's Creek," Fletcher added, his expression grim. "Old Carlos is too frail to run them off, and his sons are both working up in Kansas on the cattle drives." "Surely the law," Matilda began. "Laws spread thin out here," Fletcher interrupted, "and the Harkers know just how far they can push before facing real consequences. They're careful to keep most of their thieving and intimidation just this side of hanging offenses." The incident left a pall over the store for the rest of the day. When closing time came, Fletcher insisted on walking Matilda up to her room. "Lock your door tonight," he advised. "The Harkers saw you, and they've got a reputation with women that doesn't bear repeating in polite company." Matilda shivered despite the warmth of the evening. "I'll be careful." Fletcher hesitated, then reached into his pocket and produced a small derringer. "Take this. It's loaded, and the trigger pull is light. Aim center and you can't miss at close range." Matilda stared at the weapon, memories washing over her the weight of her father's revolver in her hands as flames consumed their home, the shot she'd fired at the man who'd set the blaze. She'd missed then, too panicked to aim properly, and he'd escaped into the night while she dragged her parents' bodies onto the lawn, too late to save them. I don't think I could use that," she said, her voice barely audible. Something in her expression must have revealed more than she intended, because Fletcher's gaze softened with understanding. "Sometimes having it is enough," he said gently. "You don't have to use it to make a man think twice." After a moment's hesitation, Matilda took the small pistol, tucking it into her pocket. "Thank you." Fletcher tipped his hat. "I'll be in town for another day or so. Send word if you need anything." That night, Matilda placed the derringer on her bedside table and tried not to think about how quickly her carefully constructed new life seemed to be complicating itself. She'd come to Brownsville to disappear, to become just another anonymous face in a town where no one knew her past or cared about her secrets. Instead, she found herself entangled with a perceptive cowboy who seemed determined to see beneath her surface, treating snake bites alongside the local doctor, and now potentially a target for the unsavory attention of the Harker brothers. Sleep eluded her for hours as she tossed and turned, her mind churning with worries. When she finally did drift off, the old nightmares returned: fire and smoke, her mother's screams, the face of the man who destroyed everything she loved. She woke gasping, sheets tangled around her legs, the phantom smell of smoke still filling her nostrils. Dawn was just breaking. Knowing sleep would not return, Matilda rose and dressed, then sat by her window watching the town slowly come to life. Across the street, she noticed Fletcher emerging from the hotel, already fully dressed and alert despite the early hour. He paused on the boardwalk, looking up, and their eyes met briefly before Matilda stepped back from the window, her heart racing inexplicably. The following days passed without incident. The Harker brothers did not return to the store, and gradually Matilda's anxiety subsided. Fletcher concluded his business in town and returned to the Circle C, though not before extracting a promise from Matilda that she would send word if there was any trouble. Life settled back into its rhythm: days at the store, quiet evenings in her room reading books borrowed from Edith's modest collection. But something had changed. Matilda found herself watching for Fletcher whenever a rider approached town, and at night, her dreams increasingly featured blue eyes and a gentle voice alongside the familiar terrors. July burned into August, bringing brutal heat that seemed to wilt everyone and everything in Brownsville. Even the usually energetic dogs that roamed the streets moved languidly, seeking whatever shade they could find. Inside the store, Matilda and Edith took turns fanning themselves as they worked, grateful for the thick adobe walls that kept the worst of the heat at bay. It was on one such scorching afternoon that Sheriff Jackson entered the store, his weathered face grave beneath his gray mustache. He nodded to Edith and Matilda, then leaned on the counter. "Afternoon, ladies. Hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there's been trouble out at the Circle C." Matilda felt her blood run cold. "What kind of trouble?" "Rustlers hit one of the remote pastures last night, took nearly 30 head of Calloway's best breeding stock." The sheriff shook his head. "Fletcher tracked them to the county line with some of his men, but lost the trail when a storm came through." "Was anyone hurt?" Matilda asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Fletcher took a bullet in the shoulder, but Doc Henderson says it's not too serious. He's back at the ranch now, mad as a wet hen and twice as stubborn." The sheriff glanced between the two women. "Thought you should know, since he trades here regular, he'll likely need extra supplies once he's back on his feet." After the sheriff left, Edith looked at Matilda with knowing eyes. "You're worried about him?" "Of course I'm concerned," Matilda said defensively. "As I would be for any acquaintance who was shot." Edith's expression made it clear she wasn't fooled. "Fletcher Calloway is a good man, one of the best in these parts. And he looks at you like you're the sunrise after a long, dark night." Matilda busied herself rearranging a display of canned goods. "You're imagining things. I'm old, not blind," Edith retorted, "and I've seen the way you watch the street when it's about time for his weekly visits. It's not." "I can't." Matilda struggled to find words. "I'm not what he thinks I am." Edith's expression softened. "Child, none of us are what others think we are. We're all more complicated than that. The question is whether you're willing to let him see who you really are, not who you're pretending to be." The words struck uncomfortably close to home, and Matilda had no response. That evening, unable to shake her concern, Matilda made a decision. After closing the store, she approached the livery stable and arranged to rent a horse for the following day, which was Sunday, her day off. "Planning a pleasure ride, Miss Kelly?" asked the stable master, a grizzled old-timer named Jenkins. "I thought I might pay a visit to the Circle C," Matilda replied, trying to sound casual. "I heard Mr. Calloway was injured." Jenkins nodded knowingly. "Got a gentle mare that would suit you fine. Want me to have her ready after church tomorrow?" "Yes, please, and could you give me directions? I've only been there once, and that was in something of a rush." The next morning dawned mercifully cooler, with clouds promising possible rain later in the day. Matilda dressed with extra care, choosing her blue dress again and pinning her hair in a simple but flattering style. She told herself it was merely a matter of looking presentable for a social call, but Edith's knowing smile as she left told her she wasn't fooling anyone, least of all herself. The ride to the Circle C took just over an hour at a leisurely pace. Matilda followed the directions Jenkins had given her, finding the landmarks easily in the daylight: the lightning-struck oak, the bend in the creek, the distinctive rock formation locals called the Sleeping Man. As she approached the ranch, her nervousness grew. What if Fletcher didn't want visitors? What if he thought her forward for coming unannounced? What if her thoughts were interrupted by the sight of Fletcher himself, sitting on the front porch of the ranch house, his left arm in a sling? He stood as she approached, surprise and something warmer lighting his features. "Miss Kelly," he called as she rode into the yard. "This is unexpected." Matilda dismounted, suddenly self-conscious. "Sheriff Jackson told us you were injured. I thought you might need supplies or—" She faltered, realizing how flimsy her excuse sounded. Fletcher's smile deepened. "Or you were worried about me, as I would be for any friend," Matilda said primly, though she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. "Of course," he agreed, though his eyes danced with amusement. "Well, friend or not, I'm glad to see you. Mrs. Diaz has made enough Sunday dinner for an army, and I would welcome the company." He led her into the house, where delicious smells emanated from the kitchen. An older Mexican woman with a kind face looked up from the stove and smiled warmly. "Ah, Senor Fletcher, this is the lady doctor you told me about," she asked in accented English. "Not exactly a doctor, Mrs. Diaz," Fletcher corrected gently. "But yes, this is Miss Kelly who helped save Tom's leg last month." "Bienvenida," Mrs. Diaz said, wiping her hands on her apron. "The food is almost ready. I hope you like chili rellenos." I'm sure everything is wonderful, Matilda assured her. To Fletcher she added, "How is your shoulder?" "Hurts like the devil," he admitted as he led her to the dining room. But the bullet went clean through, no bone damage. "Doc says I'll have full use of the arm in a few weeks." "And the rustlers," Fletcher's expression darkened, "gone along with 30 head of my best cattle. Sheriff has his suspicions about who's behind it, but no proof yet." "The Harkers," Matilda guessed. Fletcher nodded grimly, "Most likely. But they're careful, and they have friends in low places who help them move the stolen stock quickly." Mrs. Diaz served a magnificent meal of chili rellenos, beans, rice, and fresh tortillas. As they ate, Fletcher told Matilda more about the ranch, his struggles to establish it, his plans for the future, the rhythms of the seasons that governed life on the range. "It must be very different from Boston," he observed as they finished their meal. "In every possible way," Matilda agreed. "But I find I prefer it here. There's a directness to life that feels honest." "That's a good way of putting it," Fletcher said approvingly. "Though I imagine there are things you miss from city life, theaters, libraries, proper society." Matilda thought of the Boston. She'd known the social events where everyone wore masks of propriety while whispering cruel gossip behind gloved hands. The suffocating expectations of how a young lady should behave. The endless rules that had nothing to do with genuine character. "Not as much as you might think," she said softly. "What I valued most, my family, is gone. The rest was just trappings." Something in her voice must have revealed the depth of her loss, because Fletcher reached across the table and briefly covered her hand with his. The touch was warm, calloused, and over too quickly. "I'm sorry," he said simply. After dinner, they moved to the porch, where the promised rain had materialized as a gentle shower that cooled the air and filled it with the sweet scent of wet earth. They sat in comfortable rocking chairs, watching the rain fall on the thirsty land. "I should start back soon," Matilda said reluctantly, aware of the shortening afternoon. "I don't want to get caught in a downpour." "Stay," Fletcher said. When she looked at him in surprise, he clarified, "Just until the rain passes. The worst of these summer storms blows through quickly. Besides, I have something I want to show you." Curious, Matilda followed him inside and down a hallway to a room she hadn't seen on her previous visit. When Fletcher opened the door, she gasped in delight. It was a library, small but exquisite, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 3 walls and a large desk positioned to catch the light from 2 windows. A comfortable leather chair sat beside a small fireplace, and everywhere there were books, hundreds of them, their leather and cloth bindings gleaming softly in the rain-filtered light. "This is magnificent," Matilda breathed, running her fingers along the spines of several volumes. "However did you assemble such a collection out here?" Fletcher looked pleased at her reaction. "Some I brought with me from Pennsylvania. Others I've acquired over the years from dealers in San Antonio and New Orleans. Books are my one extravagance." He pulled a volume from a shelf and handed it to her. "I thought you might enjoy this one." It was a new edition of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poems, beautifully bound in soft green leather. Matilda opened it reverently, inhaling the distinctive scent of fresh paper and ink. "This is lovely," she said. "May I borrow it?" "It's yours," Fletcher said quietly. "I ordered it months ago, before I even knew you existed, but when it arrived last week, I knew it belonged to you." Matilda looked up, startled by the gift and the sentiment behind it. "I couldn't possibly, please," Fletcher interrupted. "Consider it thanks for saving Tom, or for brightening an injured man's Sunday, or simply accept it because it would give me pleasure to know these poems are being read by someone who will appreciate them." Put that way, Matilda found she couldn't refuse. "Thank you," she said, clutching the book to her chest. "I'll treasure it." They spent the next hour in the library, discussing books they'd both read and discoveries they'd each made in their literary explorations. Matilda found herself relaxing completely for the first time in years, her guard lowered by the shared love of literature and Fletcher's genuine interest in her thoughts and opinions. When the rain finally stopped, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming in the late afternoon sun, Matilda knew she could delay no longer. "I really must go," she said reluctantly. "It will be dark in a few hours." "I'll escort you," Fletcher said, rising from his chair. "You're injured," Matilda protested. "You should rest." "It's a bullet wound, not a mortal illness," Fletcher replied with a touch of stubbornness. "And I'm not letting you ride back alone with the Harkers and their ilk prowling about. Either I accompany you or you stay the night in our guest room again." Put that way, Matilda had little choice but to accept his escort. Fletcher had one of the ranch hands saddle a horse for him, ignoring the young man's concerned glances at his bandaged shoulder. They rode side by side, the air fresh and cool after the rain, wildflowers beginning to lift their heads after the welcome moisture. Conversation flowed easily between them, ranging from books to ranching to memories of their respective childhoods, though Matilda was careful to share only happy recollections from before the fire. As they approached Brownsville, the setting sun painting the western sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink, Fletcher suddenly reined in his horse. "There's something I need to say," he said, his expression serious. "And I'd rather say it here, away from town and prying eyes." Matilda's heart began to race. "Yes, I care for you, Matilda," he said simply, using her first name for the first time. "More than I thought possible after knowing someone for such a short time. I don't know what shadows haunt you, what secrets you're keeping, and I won't ask you to share them until you're ready. But I want you to know that nothing you could tell me would change how I feel." Matilda felt tears spring to her eyes, emotions too complex to name welling up inside her. "You can't know that," she whispered. "You don't know what I've done, who I really am." "I know exactly who you are," Fletcher said with quiet certainty. "You're the woman who works tirelessly at the general store, treating every customer with respect regardless of their station. You're the woman who raced to help a stranger when you heard he was snake-bitten. You're the woman whose eyes light up when she discovers a new book, who listens to poetry as if it's music." He urged his horse closer to hers. "Whatever came before, whatever mistakes or tragedies or circumstances brought you to Brownsville, they're part of you, but they don't define you." The tears spilled over now, running down Matilda's cheeks unchecked. "I'm damaged goods," she whispered, the words torn from some deep, wounded place inside her. Fletcher reached across the space between them to gently brush away her tears. "Then we're a perfect match," he said softly, "because so am I." In that moment, with the vast Texas sky blazing above them and the distant silhouette of Brownsville before them, Matilda felt something inside her shift, a door long locked beginning to open, just a crack. "I need time," she said finally, "to think, to consider." Fletcher nodded, respecting her need for space even as his eyes revealed his hope. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." They rode the rest of the way to town in silence, but it was a comfortable one, filled with unspoken possibilities. At the door of the general store, Fletcher dismounted to help her down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. For a brief moment they stood close, his eyes searching hers in the gathering twilight. "Thank you for coming today," he said. "It meant more than you know." Before she could respond, he leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, then remounted and rode away, leaving Matilda touching the spot where his lips had been, her heart thundering in her chest. In the days that followed, Matilda found herself replaying that moment again and again. Fletcher's words, "Then we're a perfect match," echoed in her mind as she went about her duties at the store. What did he mean? What wounds did he carry beneath his capable, confident exterior? And more importantly, could she trust him with her own scars, not just the physical ones that marred her back and arm, but the deeper, invisible ones that had driven her across the country in search of anonymity? A week passed, then two, with no sign of Fletcher in town. Matilda told herself she was relieved at the respite, the chance to sort through her jumbled emotions without his disturbing presence. But as days stretched into a third week, worry began to overshadow all other feelings. "Have you heard anything from the Circle C?" She finally asked Edith one quiet afternoon. The older woman looked up from her knitting. "As a matter of fact, young Mike rode in yesterday for supplies while you were at lunch, said Fletcher's been busy rebuilding fences on the North Range. That shoulder's still troubling him, but you know how men are too stubborn to rest properly." Matilda absorbed this information with mixed feelings: relief that nothing was seriously wrong, concern about his injury, and she had to admit, a touch of hurt that he hadn't sent any message to her personally. "Did he say anything else?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Edith's knowing look told her she wasn't succeeding. Nothing specific, but he did linger quite a while, asking after everyone in town, had a particular interest in how you were settling in. That night, Matilda made a decision. Removing the volume of poetry Fletcher had given her from its place of honor beside her bed, she opened it to a particular poem that had been haunting her, "How Do I Love Thee?" and began to write a letter on the blank page at the back of the book. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush, as she poured out the truth she'd been hiding for so long, the fire that had claimed her parents' lives. Set by a man her father had testified against in court, her own burns and scars, both physical and emotional, the shot she'd fired at the fleeing arsonist, her flight from Boston when rumors began to circulate that she had set the blaze herself for her inheritance. She wrote of her fear and loneliness, her shame and guilt at surviving when her parents had not. And finally, she wrote of the unexpected feeling of peace she'd found in Brownsville and the even more unexpected feelings Fletcher had awakened in her. When she finished, dawn was breaking over the town. Matilda sealed the letter in an envelope, addressed it simply to F. Calloway, Circle C Ranch, and took it downstairs to place with the outgoing mail. Before she could change her mind, she handed it to Jenkins, who served as the town's unofficial postal rider, with enough coins to ensure its prompt delivery. Then she went about her day, alternately terrified and relieved that her secrets were no longer hers alone to bear. 3 days later, as Matilda was sweeping the store's porch in the cool of early evening, she heard the now familiar sound of Fletcher's spurs. Looking up, she saw him walking toward her, hat in hand, his expression unreadable. "Miss Kelly," he said formally, stopping at the foot of the steps. "Mr. Calloway," she responded, her mouth suddenly dry. They regarded each other for a long moment. Then, reaching into his vest pocket, Fletcher produced her letter, its edges now worn as if from multiple readings. "I got your letter," he said unnecessarily. "I see that," Matilda replied, her heart racing. And, instead of answering, Fletcher climbed the steps until he stood directly before her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. Gently, he took the broom from her nerveless fingers and set it aside. "And I still say we're a perfect match," he said softly. Before she could respond, he gathered her into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Matilda found herself responding instinctively, her arms winding around his neck as she returned the kiss with all the emotion she'd kept bottled inside for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Matilda Kelly, scars and all." "How can you?" she whispered. "After what I told you." "Because I know what it is to carry guilt for things beyond your control," he said. "To see ghosts when you close your eyes, to wonder if you'll ever feel whole again." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "And because when I'm with you, those ghosts are quieter. The world seems brighter, I feel possible again." Matilda smiled through her tears. "That's exactly how I feel with you." They might have stood there longer, lost in each other, if not for the sound of approaching horses, many horses, riding hard. Fletcher tensed, turning toward the street as Sheriff Jackson came galloping up, followed by several armed men. "Fletcher, Miss Kelly, get inside, quick." The sheriff shouted. "The Harkers are coming, and they're liquored up and looking for blood." Fletcher pushed Matilda toward the store door. "Go inside and stay away from the windows," he ordered, his hand already moving to the revolver at his hip. "What are you going to do?" Matilda demanded, clutching his arm. "Help Jackson defend the town," Fletcher said grimly. "The Harkers have gone too far this time." "They killed old man Mendoza," the sheriff explained, dismounting hurriedly. "Found out he'd sent for his sons to come back from Kansas. Shot him in his own home, then set fire to the place to cover it up." The word fire sent a chill through Matilda, memories of her own tragedy threatening to overwhelm her. But then she looked at Fletcher, standing tall and determined despite his still healing shoulder, and found strength in his courage. "Be careful," she said, squeezing his hand before reluctantly retreating into the store, where Edith was already closing shutters and moving valuables away from the windows. The next hour was the longest of Matilda's life. From the relative safety of the store, she heard shouts, then gunshots, then more shouting. Edith paced nervously, her normally placid face creased with worry. "This has been brewing for months," the older woman said. "The Harkers think they own this county." It was only a matter of time before someone stood up to them. But why today? Why now? Matilda wondered aloud. Edith gave her a look that suggested the answer should be obvious. "Word gets around, dear. Fletcher's been asking questions about the fire that killed your parents. Seems he sent telegrams to Boston trying to track down the man who did it." Matilda stared at her, shocked. "He never told me that." "Probably wanted to be sure before getting your hopes up," Edith said. "But the Harkers have friends in low places, like Fletcher said. Someone must have caught wind of his inquiries and connected them to their latest crime." Before Matilda could process this information, the store's back door burst open. Two of the Harker brothers stood there, guns drawn, their faces twisted with malice. "Well, well," the elder one drawled, the same man who had harassed Matilda in the store weeks earlier. "Look what we found, the old lady and Fletcher's fancy woman." Matilda instinctively stepped in front of Edith, her mind racing. The derringer Fletcher had given her was upstairs in her room, useless to her now. "The sheriff and his men are right outside," she said, striving for a calm she didn't feel. "You won't get away with whatever you're planning." The younger Harker laughed, a chilling sound. "Oh, they're plenty busy with our brother and his boys out front. Won't even notice us slipping out the back with a little insurance." He gestured with his gun. "Both of you move, we're going for a little ride." Matilda glanced at Edith, whose face had gone pale with fear. The older woman wouldn't survive rough treatment or a desperate flight. Making a split-second decision, Matilda reached for a nearby display of canned goods and sent it crashing to the floor. The noise was tremendous in the confined space. Both Harkers flinched, momentarily distracted. In that instant, Matilda grabbed Edith's arm and shoved her toward the storeroom. "Run," she shouted. "Get help." As the older woman fled, Matilda snatched up a heavy iron skillet from a shelf and swung it with all her might at the younger Harker. The improvised weapon connected with his wrist with a sickening crack, and his gun clattered to the floor. She dove for the weapon, but the elder Harker was quicker, kicking it away and grabbing her by the hair. "You'll pay for that, missy," he snarled, dragging her toward the door. Matilda fought like a wildcat, kicking and clawing, but the man was too strong. He clubbed her with the butt of his pistol, and the world went dark around the edges. When she came to, she was on a horse, bound and gagged, riding double with the elder Harker. Night had fallen, and they were moving fast through scrubland she didn't recognize. Her head throbbed where she'd been struck, and terror clawed at her throat as she realized how dire her situation was. They rode for what seemed like hours, finally stopping at a dilapidated cabin hidden in a rocky draw. The younger Harker was cradling his injured wrist and cursing steadily as they dismounted. "What now, Seth?" he demanded of his brother. "Whole damn county's gonna be looking for us after this." "Now we use her to buy our way to Mexico," Seth replied, yanking Matilda roughly from the horse. "Calloway's sweet on her. He'll pay plenty to get her back in one piece." "And if he don't?" the younger brother asked, a nasty edge to his voice. Seth shoved Matilda toward the cabin. "Then we still have some fun before we cross the border." Inside, they tied her to a chair and removed the gag. The cabin was filthy and stank of old whiskey and unwashed bodies. A single oil lamp cast sinister shadows on the walls. "You're making a terrible mistake," Matilda said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "There's already a price on your heads for killing Mr. Mendoza. Kidnapping will only make it worse." Seth Harker slapped her, hard enough to make her ears ring. "Shut your mouth unless you're asked a question." Matilda tasted blood from her split lip but refused to cower. She thought of her parents, of the night they'd died, how she'd been helpless to save them. She wouldn't be helpless now. While the brothers argued about their next move, Matilda worked at the ropes binding her wrists. using a technique she'd read about in one of Fletcher's adventure novels. Slowly, painfully, she created slack in the bindings. Hours passed. The younger Harker left, presumably to stand watch outside, while Seth dozed in a chair across the room, his gun never far from his hand. Matilda continued working at her bonds, ignoring the pain as the rough rope chafed her wrists raw. Just before dawn, she felt the ropes give way. Keeping her hands behind her to maintain the illusion of captivity, she looked around the cabin for a weapon. A heavy iron poker leaned against the cold fireplace, just a few feet away. Moving with agonizing slowness, Matilda eased her feet out of their loosened bindings. Seth Harker snored on, oblivious. One step, then another, brought her within reach of the poker. As her fingers closed around the cold metal, a floorboard creaked beneath her weight. Seth jerked awake, his hand already reaching for his gun. Matilda swung the poker with every ounce of strength she possessed. It connected with Seth's shoulder, drawing a howl of pain. He lunged for her, but she swung again, catching him across the temple. He went down hard, blood streaming from the wound. Heart pounding, Matilda grabbed his gun and ran for the door. Outside, the first gray light of dawn revealed the younger Harker returning from the woods, alerted by his brother's cry. "Stop right there," Matilda commanded, raising the revolver with shaking hands. He froze, then slowly reached for his own weapon. "You ain't got the nerve, lady," he sneered. The memory of that night in Boston flashed through Matilda's mind, the shot she'd fired at her parents' killer, the shot that had missed. She wouldn't miss this time. "I've already lost everything once," she said steadily. "I won't lose my future too. Drop your gun or I swear I'll shoot." Something in her voice, the absolute conviction, the steel beneath the fear, made the man hesitate. In that moment of indecision, hoofbeats sounded from the trail and Fletcher's voice rang out. "Matilda," the younger Harker panicked, drawing his gun in one fluid motion. Without thinking, Matilda squeezed the trigger. The report was deafening in the dawn quiet. The Harker staggered, a look of shock on his face as he clutched his chest, then collapsed. Then Fletcher was there, leaping from his horse, Sheriff Jackson and several armed men right behind him. He gathered Matilda into his arms, heedless of the gun still clutched in her trembling hand. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes wild with fear and relief. "I'm all right," Matilda assured him, though her voice shook. "Bruised, but all right." The sheriff and his men secured Seth Harker, still unconscious, inside the cabin, and confirmed that the younger brother was dead, shot through the heart. "You're a hell of a shot, Miss Kelly," Sheriff Jackson said, not unkindly. "Especially for someone who claims not to know how to use a gun." Matilda looked down at the weapon in her hand, then handed it to Fletcher. "I didn't think I could," she admitted, "but when it came down to it, I discovered I'm stronger than I believed." Fletcher pulled her close again, his arms tight around her. "I never doubted it for a moment." The ride back to Brownsville was a blur. Matilda, wrapped in Fletcher's coat and seated before him on his horse, drifted in and out of consciousness, the events of the night catching up with her. She was vaguely aware of Fletcher's solid presence behind her, his arms holding her securely, his voice occasionally murmuring reassurances in her ear. Dr. Henderson was waiting when they arrived in town. He clucked over her injuries, the bruise on her temple, her split lip, her raw and bleeding wrists, but pronounced her remarkably whole considering her ordeal. "What she needs now is rest," he told Fletcher, who hadn't left her side, "and someone to watch over her. These kinds of experiences can affect the mind as much as the body." "I'll take care of her," Fletcher promised. To Matilda's surprise, he brought her not to the room above the store but to the town's small hotel where he'd already arranged for a proper suite. Mrs. Abernathy from the inn was there, along with Edith, both women fussing over Matilda like mother hens. "You saved my life," Edith told her, tears in her eyes. "Running to the storeroom like that, I was able to get out the window and find the sheriff. We've been worried sick, Mrs. Abernathy added, plumping pillows and arranging blankets. "The whole town's been talking of nothing else since those villains took you." After they'd bathed her, dressed her in a fresh nightgown, and settled her in bed, the women finally left. Only Fletcher remained, sitting beside her bed, his face showing the strain of the past day. "You should rest too," Matilda told him, reaching for his hand. "You look exhausted." "I'll rest when I know you're truly safe," he replied, bringing her fingers to his lips. "When I heard they'd taken you, Matilda, I've never been so terrified in my life, not even during the war." "How did you find me?" she asked. "The youngest Harker brother broke under questioning," Fletcher explained. "He wasn't with the others during the kidnapping." Once he knew his brothers had killed Mendoza, he gave up the location of their hideout. His jaw tightened. "I would have found you even if he hadn't talked. I would have searched every inch of Texas." Matilda's eyes filled with tears at the fierce conviction in his voice. "I believe you would have." Fletcher leaned closer, his gaze intense. "I meant what I said before all this happened. I love you, Matilda Kelly. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Despite her exhaustion and pain, joy bloomed in Matilda's heart. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much that it frightens me sometimes." "Does that mean yes?" Fletcher asked, a smile breaking through his worried expression. Matilda reached up to touch his face, marveling at the turn her life had taken since arriving in Brownsville just a few months earlier. "It means yes," she confirmed. "Yes to everything, to love, to life, to building something new together." Fletcher's answering kiss was gentle, mindful of her split lip, but filled with promise. 2 days later, Seth Harker was transferred to the county seat for trial, heavily guarded to prevent any rescue attempts by the remaining members of his gang. The evidence against him was overwhelming: the murder of Carlos Mendoza, the cattle rustling, the kidnapping of Matilda. The territorial judge sentenced him to hang, a sentence carried out with little ceremony the following week. With the Harker threat eliminated, a sense of relief settled over Brownsville. Life gradually returned to normal, though Matilda found herself the recipient of many admiring glances and congratulatory comments as the story of her bravery spread. "You're quite the town heroine," Fletcher teased as they sat on the porch of the Circle C ranch house one evening in late September. Matilda had moved to the ranch after their small, private wedding at Brownsville's church, with Edith, Dr. Henderson, and Sheriff Jackson as witnesses. "Hardly," Matilda demurred, though she smiled at his teasing. "I was terrified the entire time." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Fletcher reminded her, taking her hand. "It's acting despite it." The autumn air was crisp, hinting at the coming winter. Inside, Mrs. Diaz was preparing dinner, the delicious smells wafting through the open windows. On Matilda's lap lay Fletcher's latest gift, a leather-bound journal in which she had begun to write her story. Not as the tragedy it had once seemed, but as the beginning of a journey that had led her to this place, this man, this life. "I received a letter today," Fletcher said after a comfortable silence, "from the Boston police detective I've been corresponding with." Matilda looked up, her heart quickening. "And they've arrested a man named Samuel Thorne for the murder of your parents. He confessed after being caught setting another fire. Apparently, he was seeking revenge against several people who testified against his brother in a fraud case years ago." Tears filled Matilda's eyes as a weight she'd carried for 3 long years finally lifted. "They know I didn't do it." Fletcher squeezed her hand. "They never truly suspected you, love. The rumors were just that, rumors, spread by people with nothing better to do than gossip. The detective apologized for not clearing your name sooner." Matilda leaned against her husband's shoulder, watching the sun set over the land that had become her home. "It doesn't matter now," she said softly. "That life is behind me. This is where I belong." "With a damaged old cowboy," Fletcher teased gently. Matilda turned to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "With my perfect match," she corrected. In the years that followed, the Circle C prospered under their joint care. Matilda's business sense complemented Fletcher's ranching knowledge, and together they built one of the most successful cattle operations in the county. They converted one of the ranch's outbuildings into a schoolhouse, where Matilda taught the children of their workers along with their own 2 sons and daughter. The scars on Matilda's back and arm never fully faded, but they ceased to be a source of shame. like the occasional nightmares that still visited both her and Fletcher, his from the war. Hers from the fire. They became simply part of their shared history, acknowledged but not defined by. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Fletcher presented Matilda with a special gift, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their children on one side and on the other, engraved words that made her smile through tears of joy. "I'm damaged goods," she whispered. "Then we're a perfect match," he replied, and they were in all the ways that mattered most.